Hey everyone, welcome back. I've been trying to find a way to make Yareli's kit work, and I think I may have finally found something. I'll admit it has only limited synergy with her, but hey, it's better than nothing what we've had so far. Today's another Zymos video. This thing just keeps getting better, and it really appreciates the Sisters of Parvos update. Zymos is the maggot gun. It shoots slowly and has bad critical chance, but if you hit heads, they explode with even more damage, and produce flies that home in on other enemy heads. Kind of like a budget breach surge, if you will. The most interesting thing about this weapon is that the crit stats actually double dip on the secondary explosion, both critical chance and critical damage. This is huge because it makes an otherwise non-crit viable pistol extremely strong. The headflies that come out also proc forced impact when finding new targets. Note that this is the fly impact and not the secondary explosion. There is potential for hemorrhage here, but you will need a lot for it to scale off of, as it ignores a lot of mods. The problem is actually getting the ball rolling, which we'll figure out how to do today. Now this weapon has a painful 3.2 second reload. Luckily our new toy secondary Merciless offers 30% reload speed at rank 5, so you'll be seeing that. Now let's take a look at the builds. This is the Zymos setup I've decided on. There are a few things that we can switch around here, but let's go through the build quickly first. I've chosen to build for corrosive instead of stacking a ton of base damage and crit because Zymos with the new arcanes and mods now does enough damage to kill outright without slash procs outside of endurance scenarios. This will handle heavy gunners extremely well by both stripping armor and getting bonus damage. Against bombards and other alloy armor targets, while we don't get the bonus damage, the armor strip from corrosive status is still there, and the reason I'm actually slotting hemorrhage on this setup still. As this weapon requires ramp up to see its full potential, I'm bringing Hornet Strike so that we actually get a decent base to start the fight. Galvanized Diffusion is the first of our new mods, which now provides 230% multi-shot over Barrel Diffusion's original 120. We end up shooting 3.3 bullets instead of 2 once fully stacked, or a 50% final damage increase. This is pretty big. Next is our Galvanized Crosshairs mod. This is basically a souped up hydraulic crosshairs, which is the pistol versions of Argon's scope. You need to get headshot kills to proc its passive, which means DOTs will not trigger this, but hey, Zymos can actually do that now. As you want to be hitting headshots with Zymos, the aiming requirement isn't as big a detriment as you would expect. Otherwise, you can slot Prime Pistol Gambit, but this will drop you down nearly a full crit tier in the end. Ah yes, the double dipping crits I mentioned. So how do they work? This is the equation. It's kind of complicated, but basically your modded critical chance gets multiplied by itself on top of any flat crit. So this means you'll see Arcane Avenger later. Essentially, Galvanized Crosshairs, when fully stacked with Yareli's passive, should push you to 200% real crit, meaning seeing only oranges and very few yellows. I made my own little Excel file to calculate this based on the wiki equation. If you use Prime Pistol Gambit instead, you'll only be in the low 100s with her passive, meaning almost entirely yellows with a few oranges. It's entirely up to you. I find Zymos can easily clear entire crowds and rewards aim, so this pistol speaks to me and I'm fine aiming with it. If that doesn't suit you, feel free to just run and gun with Prime Pistol Gambit. Critical damage is the same, but a bit simpler since we don't really have external sources of flat critical damage. So it's essentially a straight up multiplier on itself. Finally, our last slot is Primed Expel. This is for when the upfront damage isn't enough to kill from explosions and you need these slash procs instead. Honestly, this will not kick in until endurance runs facing the high hundreds to thousands, and is what keeps the weapon viable. If you're only intending to use this for normal steel path or lower, the raw corrosive damage is typically enough. You can replace this mod with either Lethal Torrent for better fire rate, but keeping it below 2.5, or Sharpened Bullets. Sharpened Bullets has more DPS than Lethal Torn on this build, but it does require you to aim, so it isn't really practical if you aren't running Galvanized Crosshairs also. The extra fire rate is definitely appreciated though to make it more comfy to use. For alternative builds, you can also drop Hornet Strike for primed quick draw. This will cut the reload down significantly to 1.7 seconds and allow the weapon to play much smoother. If you do this for max quality of life though, keep in mind you will really have to hunt down fodder to get your stacks back up if everything falls off, since you have no base damage to start. We can actually stack secondary Merciless with this to help boost our damage even further and make up for not having Hornet Strike on the build. The extra 30% reload will cut down on the reload all the way to 1.46 seconds. This is rounded up on the arsenal though to 1.5. Even if you do choose to run Hornet Strike, the amount of base damage Merciless gives more than doubles your total damage and still keeps the reload down to 2.5, which is still quite slow but tolerable. This is the build I'll be using to showcase. Finally, you can slot projectile flight speed in the X-List to make it snipe faster. As you can tell, I'm not running viral on the build, but I can outsource this onto my Panzer Vulpaphyla, which means I can also slap the synth mods on it to holster reload my Zymos when I'm not using it. Now let's take a look at that Yareli build. A very big part of this setup is using her passive and be actively moving to grant yourself that 200% critical chance from her passive. Between her passive and galvanized crosshairs, this gives us a bonus 520% critical chance and is a massive amount when considering double dipping. For her mods, I've chosen to go higher on range and duration. This is essentially a CC setup that eschews damage output from the frame. We have 2 auger mods and Yareli has 113 shields with the Decay Dragon key. With this much range, casting her 4 will ragdoll the majority of the rooms so you can cast and snare freely and top back up on your shields. This is why we're running overextended, auger reach, and stretch. The fairly high duration with prime continuity and auger message allows us to keep our 3 up for extensive periods of time. Slash procs from the ring will deter any melee units getting close to us if we screw up. You basically just cast this once per minute and then forget about it. This is essentially your last line of defense against things that get way too close. Nonetheless, this shouldn't be happening often as you have a 26.5 meter radius on your ensnare. Your 4 has an even larger radius at 31.8. Finally, we also have rolling guard on the build for even more protection. While we are running only 100 efficiency, we are slotting flow and arcane energize to sustain that. Primed flow if you can fit it, my polarities are kinda screwed up. And yes, I didn't mention it until now, but our combat discipline and arcane avenger setup rears its head again. This is actually extremely poor on Zymos, which has poor base crit, as even avenger crit buff that procs from killing enemies will double dip in Zymos' calculations. With Avenger and Galvanized Crosshairs fully stacked, we will be beyond 500% real crit, or tier 5 crits, or what is considered red 3 crits. And remember, while the slash proc from Zymos force impacts on the secondary projectiles may ignore elementals and in this case also base damage mods, they do still factor in crit tiers. We are also factoring Vigor Swap for some swap speed and base damage, but this is actually because we're bringing Scourge, which is the last piece of the puzzle. When you throw this thing, it provides a wide field aura that pulses headshot attracting fields onto enemies. This makes it much easier to set up Zymos and keep it going. You don't always have to use it, as Ensnare already does a lot of the setup for you, but it is really handy for starting the stacks up if they reset. You don't need any mods on this gun at all, as nothing affects the pulse frequency or radius of the headshot aura field. And, well, this build doesn't need a melee either. For this loadout, you could use Airburst instead of Ensnare to get more damage on the pistol from Airburst rounds, but I feel once the pistol is rolling, it doesn't actually have any damage problems. I guess it could help you start, but Airburst isn't a hard CC and ragdolls enemies. This makes it harder to land headshots and you will really need to use Scourge for it to be reliable. Enemies will also recover much sooner, so you may want to actually bring a melee primer like a Contagion or Zorus to proc hold on them, as well as Viral to slow down their recovery from Airburst's ragdoll. Anyways, let's test this build out. These are Corrupted Heavy Gunners at level 150. Pretty standard, and we'll go with our first test. I'm essentially start by casting Ensnare and then chucking my Scourge at them. Now's the time to start lining up your shot and get these stacks up. See how easily they die after a few shots? My Arcane Avenger has now kicked in too. Alright, let's spawn them in again, and I'll come back to Ensnare and shoot again. And they're dead. Okay, one more time, spawn them in again, and... that's it. It's pretty obvious that the damage output is vastly overwhelming from Zymos once all the buffs are in play, so let's change this up a little bit. I'm going to spawn Drakkar Manic Bombards. These are weak to radiation and not corrosive, so while I'll still be getting the armor strip, I won't be getting the damage bonus anymore. Also, these things have 2.5 times more health than the heavy gunners. This is literally equal to an Exogok officer. I've had somebody else test that. In practice, the only real difference is Exogok officers have ferrite armor and Drakkar Manic Bombards have alloy armor. So this is basically the worst possible scenario. The tankiest standard Grineer unit in the game, which this is worse than what you'll see in Steel Path scaling, by the way. And I have the wrong armor element, corrosive instead of radiation. Just let me change to the right Bane though, as it doesn't make sense otherwise. Alright, corrosive versus Grineer alloy armor instead of radiation. Here we go. Ensnare, Scourge, and then Zymos shots. Well, it's taking quite a few more shots to get the ball rolling this time, huh? This is way worse than anything you'll ever see on Steel Path unless you go Endurance, but here's the thing. You see, once I start landing some of these kills, I'm starting to get my stacks, and the instant I get my red crits back from Avenger, they all die instantly. I can keep spawning more of these and nothing will change. You see? One more time just to seal the deal. And there we go. So I think Zymos actually got a massive upgrade out of this update and gets significant benefits from all the Galvanized mods. Imagine what it can do once Galvanized Shot is fixed and replaces Hornet Strike. It's a proc heavy gun that you'll shoot multiple times, so you can only imagine what type of damage that would output, as well as all the bonus status chance from the mod. It's even one of the few guns that can make proper use out of Galvanized Crosshairs, because the secondary explosions seek out heads and double dip crit stats. This is definitely a fun one to mess around with. Honestly, if you use Scourge extensively, you could even use Yareli's Ford to group together instead and run Breach Surge. The damage would be nuts. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you the new information out always, as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Tempestari and the Sisters of Parvos updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm also preparing to get you new info first once more new war stuff drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.